beautiful looking offensive line, leading rusher in the SEC. So this isn't your mama's and dad air raid that from a few years ago. This is like Mississippi State, where they want to run the football down your throat, and they have a running back who can do it. They have a physical offensive line who can do it. Running back leading the SEC in rushing attempts, rushing yards, and yards per game. When they don't want to hand it off to him, they've got receivers on the outside that are dynamite. And then they've got, from a special team standpoint, arguably the best tandem of punt returner and kick returner in our conference as well. So when you talk about.
All right. Welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan, and we're here to break down the Gamecocks matchup with Mississippi State. As always, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube so you can see when we go live. Pop in, leave some comments, and we'll try to get to those throughout the stream. I think that pretty well sums up, I guess, what South Carolina is facing in Mississippi State this week. There from Coach Beamer on Tuesday at the press conference, but we'll get into more of those details here in just a second. As always, we start with a little bit of recruiting. I'll have a full visitors list posted tomorrow for who we're anticipating in town. I also, this is a little bit further out, but Daniel Hill, of course, who is one of the biggest 2024 targets left on the board, is expected to be at the Alabama-Ole Miss game this weekend. Obviously, Bama's the big competition there. And then should be at Tennessee to watch South Carolina play Tennessee next weekend. I think he's kind of looking at both, but obviously going to get a little bit more of the Tennessee experience there. Another 2024 note, we're hearing a lot of buzz about Fred Johnson, who is the 3-star linebacker out of Virginia. That's Rivals national recruiting analyst Adam Friedman's territory. Had a good conversation with him earlier this week after Friedman got to see Johnson in person. And it looks like he's looking at a pretty significant ratings bump here whenever the new 2024 ratings come out. So that's good news for South Carolina's coaching staff, who continues to find these little underrated gems. If you guys remember back in the summer, Fred Johnson was a guy that camped at South Carolina, kind of under the radar. Before that, I actually believe, don't quote me on this exactly, but if I remember correctly, I had to kind of text the Rivals National folks at that time because I don't know if he even had a rating yet. And that's just because he hadn't camped with us. No one had been out to see him yet, all those sorts of things. So yeah, pretty meteoric rise for Fred Johnson. Josiah Thompson might be another one that gets a little bit of a bump. I don't know that he'll get all the way up to 5 stars like some of the other services have him or not. But yeah, so we'll see how that all shakes out. I'll have that full weekly recruiting wrap up for you tomorrow with the recruiting visitors list. All right, let's get into Mississippi State. So like Shane Beamer said there at the top, they have the leading rusher in the SEC, both in carries, yardage, all the things. That is Jaquavius Marks, right? We were trying to figure out how to say this at the beginning of the show or before the show. Obviously was pretty good last year for them. Good enough that Dylan Johnson ended up transferring out, another pretty talented running back over there. And then it seems like their philosophy, obviously, since the late Mike Leach passed over the summer, has changed a lot from that more air raid style that saw what's the quarterback's name again?
Will Rogers.
Yeah, Will Rogers kind of entering this year as, one of the best, most veteran signal callers in the SEC. He was ahead of Spencer Rattler on a lot of those preseason lists. He's kind of taken more of a backseat to the running game and an emphasis on that. Now, Mississippi State's offense hasn't been performing all that well. They scored 14 last week against LSU in a blowout, got blown out 41-14. But the run game is definitely something that's going to play a big factor here, and whether or not South Carolina can slow that down, which of course they've struggled a little bit with over the last 3 years. So I don't know. I guess what are your initial thoughts about this matchup and the likelihood that South Carolina can slow that down and kind of get ahead of this one?
So the Jaquavius Marks thing too, and this is courtesy of Mississippi State's game notes this week, which were great. He's the only active player in the country with over 1,000 career rushing and receiving yards anywhere. And a lot of that comes back to the air raid last year. They were throwing the ball out of the backfield a lot. They were, dropping back 50, 55 times a game. But this is as dangerous of an individual player as South Carolina is going to see in a backfield all season. It does look a little bit funny is not the right word, but you look at kind of these SEC leaderboards, right? You got Will Rogers. He's tied with Bryce Young in all-time touchdowns, and he's 200 yards from passing Peyton Manning in yards, and they're still going to try to run the ball more. He threw it, I think, 18 times in the Arizona game too, or maybe last week. This is going to be a challenge. This is going to be kind of where you look at the middle of that South Carolina defense specifically, which I know we're going to talk about. You need a really, really good Debo Williams, Stone Blandon game. You need TJ Sanders to be what he was last week. Boogie Tonka. That's kind of where this game comes down to me, I think, at least if you're South Carolina's defense is what can you do kind of between the tackles? What can you do against the run? I feel like you feel pretty good about your secondary out in space. I wrote about that this week a little bit against these Mississippi State receivers. But I think this is going to look a lot like the Florida game last year, at least not in terms of the outcome, but in terms of identity and what your opponent's going to try to do to you is you're going to see a lot of that just ground and pound stuff.
Yeah, and when we think about the strengths for Mississippi State on defense, their two linebackers last year were the two leading tacklers in the SEC with a combined 228 tackles. Both those guys are returning. If you're looking for names on the back of the jerseys on Saturday, that's Jet Johnson and Nathaniel Watson. I think you're going to struggle to run the ball, but you were going to struggle to run the ball regardless of who you were playing because that's kind of how this offense is set up for South Carolina. I do think you have some advantages, especially Xavier Legette is better than anyone that they have in their secondary, I think. You would love to have both Xavier Legette and Juice Wells out there at the same time, like you saw on that first drive against Georgia. You saw how dangerous that combo could be, and really maybe one of the what could have been of the season. Of course, we think Juice Wells is going to get back here in a few weeks, but what could have been of the season was having both those guys out there through this early stretch and what could have happened there. But I still think, you've seen Omega Blake kind of take a step forward. You've seen some other guys start to contribute here. Luke Doty even. Do we know if Amarian Brown's expected to be back? Or
he's still questionable. He didn't do as much as they wanted to in practice yesterday. We'll get more from Shane in about 5 hours here on Carolina Calls. I would lean towards, even if he plays, that's not going to be a 70 snap outburst for him anyway. You're going to work him in. I think this is still going to be another week where you need a guy like Omega Blake to step up, guy like Eddie Lewis.
Yeah, and we also saw Dowell Loggins in particular yesterday talk a lot about freshmen and kind of working them in. Maybe this is a week where we start to see some of those freshman receivers take a step forward. Because it seemed like a lot of what he was saying yesterday was like and this is something we've talked about on the podcast too, right? The balance of maybe they're your most talented guy, but do you destroy their confidence too early? Those sorts of things. The mental aspect all comes into play whenever you're playing these freshmen. And obviously the schedule has been kind of tough to start the season. But as it starts to lighten up a little bit down the stretch through this middle portion, maybe you start to see some Nick Harbor or
Tyshawn
Russell, who looked good against Furman. So I don't know. I think you have options, and I think you probably have an advantage with your wide receivers versus their secondary is what my initial point here was.
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned yet Mississippi State safety Sean Preston Jr. He's a fifth-year senior. He's a starter. He's already got 10 tackles, a pick, and a forced fumble this season. He's out for the first half Saturday. He got a targeting call in the second half of that LSU game last week, which is obviously a one-half suspension. So at least in the first half, you're going to be seeing a backup at safety if you want to push the envelope, test some deep shots a little bit. And I think that is kind of throwing the ball deep to the boundary, some of those 50-50 balls that you trust Legette to come down with. I think that is kind of the way to go about doing this. And we've had the running game discussion so many times at this point. I I just don't, especially this week in particular, where you're facing these linebackers and you feel you might have an advantage on the back end. I just don't even know if it's worth trying to run the floor. I mean, obviously, you're not going to call 70 plays and have it be 68 passes and 2 runs, but like on a general down-to-down basis, I'm not really sure what you get out of trying to run the ball in this game.
Yeah, and if we want to talk a little bit more about Mississippi State's defense, obviously last year's defensive coordinator, Zach Arnett, has now stepped up to be the head coach, so they're running a similar scheme to what they were running last year when those two guys led the SEC in tackles. They run a 3-3-5, which South Carolina fans, if you think back to like the Charlie Strong era, that's where that came from. He was one of the early innovators and one of the people that made that popular, even though it kind of originated in the late 80s. But so another factor I think here is we heard from Dowell Loggins that Tree Babalade, who obviously kind of has solidified himself as that left tackle after a great game against Georgia. But also we might see more Trovon Ball at right guard, another true freshman. And we were talking before we got on here, we definitely feel like those two guys are your most talented guys for those positions on the roster right now. But from a mental aspect, that 3-3-5 could mess with them a little bit. And also just from a mental aspect, we've seen a couple of false starts and sort of mental mistakes out of the offensive line here in the early going, which is something that they're going to need to avoid to keep the ball moving.
Yeah, I think, and again, this is another conversation I think we've had on seemingly every show we've done since the season started. But yeah, I think that is your best chance. I think, Spencer was talking a little bit, I guess it would have been Tuesday, about those young offensive linemen, about how, you can live with some mistakes from them. I think he used the term like, Tree's false starts didn't bother me. It's when we've got wide receivers or veterans doing that is what gets me frustrated, something like that. Young, going to have to live with, I'm playing all the hits here from the last couple of shows, but Young, going to have to live with mistakes. I still think the guys who are your most talented, the guys who, you can go back to recruiting rankings, your 4 stars, the ones you brought in to be the future of this program up front, give you your best chance. And also, this is a Mississippi State pass rush that hasn't done a ton this year, 2 sacks in 3 games. If you wanted to try to work Trovon Ball in, if you wanted to try that look with 2 true freshmen playing most of the snaps, I'm not saying it's easy by any means. I know that 3-3-5, those unbalanced fronts, you can get some twists and some stunts with the linebackers for confusion. But in general, I think this is a game to at least give that a try. And I think that gives you a better chance than maybe what you saw with Ja'Kai Moore at right guard, and then you kick Fugard at right tackle. Some of the stuff you saw last week that just wasn't working at all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you also have a friendly environment at home, so you're not having to deal with the noise and stuff as much, which will be useful before you have to go into Neyland Stadium in front of 100,000 people next week for a night game, which we got confirmation that's going to be a night game earlier this week. All right, so I think we see a path for South Carolina to move the ball on offense. You're going to have to protect Spencer Rattler. We've talked about how they've used some of these veteran tight ends like Joshua Simon and Trey Knox to kind of help bring these young tackles along, or these inexperienced tackles along, assuming Ja'Kai Moore ends up at right tackle. So I think that they can probably piece together enough to give Rattler some time to move the ball and throw the ball down the field. Defensively, how are you feeling about South Carolina's matchup against this pretty accomplished run game, even though they've kind of struggled to score some points here and there this season?
I think you have to, and this is kind of the backbone of what I wrote, and you can read on Game Pass Scoop tomorrow, kind of previewing this game and final. This feels a lot like the Kentucky game last year, just in terms of what it can do for your season, swinging either way. And if you think about that game and the back you faced in that game, Chris Rodriguez, this is a yards aren't points game. And what I mean by that is Jaquavius Marks is going to break some runs. He's probably going to be more efficient than most of the backs you're going to face this season. It might look like third, fourth quarter of that Georgia game last week. However, if you can bow up in the red zone, if you can do what you did in Athens a couple times last week and force 2 missed field goals, or 4 field goal attempts, I should say, yards aren't points. And if Mississippi State's going on these long drives and they're not going to get points out of them, I believe they had a 19-play drive against Arizona where they fumbled in the red zone. as one example. You can kind of, for lack of a better term, make them shorten the game on themselves a little bit if they're going to kind of do it this way, and you can hold them to field goals. I think if you can force even one turnover in this game, that could be big. Just the way what we're expecting to be a tight game, you could flip a possession that way. They didn't do that last week in Athens. I think you just kind of got to live with the fact that he's going to break off a couple chunks, and you got to just keep him out of the end zone as much as you can. Is kind of where I would stack this up.
Yeah, I mean, you played the bend and don't break style against Georgia. It worked a lot of the time, but also a big factor in that, and something that the Gamecocks have relied on in their better games over the last 3 years is having the other team make a mistake eventually, be it a turnover or whatever. Georgia, unfortunately, didn't ever make that mistake. You didn't end up with any turnovers last week, and they scored on enough of those drives to pull it out. This Mississippi State's team is not Georgia. I think that you can. I mean, now granted, Will Rogers has protected the ball pretty well so far. He hasn't thrown a pick yet this year, even though last week he was harassed by LSU's defensive front and was sacked 4 times and only completed 39% of his passes. So not a good day by any stretch, but he's been at least fairly safe with the football. But I do think, hopefully you can stretch some of those drives out, like you said, and then create a turnover here or there, or a big play, even if it's just a tackle for loss or whatever, to kind of flip those drives back. And back to, I guess, the running back, Clayton White called him like the vision of what he expected an SEC running back to be before he came here. So, I mean, this is a guy that's probably going to be playing on Sundays. It's definitely a tall task. One of those factors, I think, that plays into this, and this kind of goes back to the same point we were making about the offensive line, is your depth at linebacker. So we've seen Debo Williams start almost every snap so far throughout the season, and Stone Blanton's not too far behind him. He's probably started like 90% of the snaps this season. Do we see a little bit more Pup Howard this weekend, perhaps? Or how are you seeing sort of the rotations play out on defense?
Is it too blunt? Is it too harsh to say that I think we're kind of at the point where you're just going to do it or don't do it with that kind of thing? We always talk about it. It feels early. It does. It's home game 2. It's SEC game 2. You're a third of the way through your regular season after Saturday. Like, it goes quick in this sport. It's a 12-game sample size. You haven't seen anywhere near as much of Pup Howard as I think you were expecting to, and especially if I told you before the year that Mo Cabo would get hurt on drive 1, and you still wouldn't be seeing Pup Howard almost. I think he played 12 snaps against Georgia. The Trovon Bothan, we already had that discussion. I think at this point, if you want your freshmen to play, if you want them to be part of the rotation, yeah, like now, go. The season's already a third of the way through after Saturday. I don't think you have that much longer to wait on this. I just don't. I think you do need – I'm not even going to say they should. I think you need to play Pup Howard 30-ish snaps on Saturday, depending on how the game flow goes.
Yeah, and I think he's kind of earned that up to this point too. Going back and looking at the snaps he has played, maybe there's a little bit of a step back, but it hasn't been too significant. And I don't think that you can continue to play those guys at the clip that you are up to this point. Well,
it's interesting you say that, though, just not to cut you off, but the coaches have all said that. I think after all 3 games, they said we got to get those guys in more. So at what point does saying they need to do that become actually doing it, I guess, is my point.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And I mean, Clayton White specifically said that Pup should have played, 15 to 20 more plays last week. Yeah. So, maybe because they have the specificity of that number in mind, it's something that they make an emphasis of this week. And I agree that this week's a good week to do it. You're playing against a winnable opponent at home, and you're setting up, the rest of your season. And I guess that kind of brings me to my next point. How big is this game for South Carolina this week? We've talked a little bit about it, even in the preseason, that they probably needed to split UNC and Mississippi State. Obviously, they already lost the North Carolina game. I hate to use the term must win, mostly because it's a cliche, but also I think we've seen, even in the 2 years that we've been covering South Carolina, that I would have considered the Florida game last year a must win, right? And then things kind of pretty quickly flipped on their head right after that. So I'm not suggesting that there's no way that you have the season that you want to have should you not win this one, but if it certainly feels like the window gets much, much narrower if you don't win this one.
I think what you look at if you don't win this game is you just start doing math, right? You've got 8 regular season games left. You've got to go 7-1 to match your win total from last year. That goes without saying. That's probably not going to happen. You got to go 4-2 in the league just to get to your SEC win total from last year. I'm not saying that's impossible. That's going to require winning at least one SEC road game and then cleaning up all your home games. If you lose on Saturday is what that would mean. To get to a bowl game, even if you lose Saturday, you're talking about 5-3, which definitely isn't impossible. You still have Vandy, you still have Jack State, but you're going to have to probably go on the road and steal at least one game to get to a bowl game if you lose on Saturday. And you would be staring down a very real possibility of 0-3 in the league, which I know we both don't think Tennessee's great. They're not as good as they were last year, but you still got to go to Knoxville at night next week, and that's not going to be easy. Must win. It all depends how you define success, how you define expectations. But in terms of accomplishing the things they accomplished last year and just getting to that point, yeah, I think it kind of has to be a must-win game.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm okay with calling this a gather yourself year or whatever you want to call it, where it's like you took a step from year 1 to year 2, took a step from you took a big step in year 1, took a big step in year 2. Maybe you can't expect to take as big of a step. Obviously, like there's only
so many more games to get to, right?
Yeah, and it gets harder as you take further steps. So is this a gather yourself year and then take a big step next year? Maybe, sure, but I still think to sell what you're trying to sell on the recruiting trail, to make the moves in the portal this next cycle that you want to make. And sort of feel like you have gathered yourself to make that next step next year, which we kind of are excited about. A lot of these young players, I mean, obviously we keep talking about them. Then I think you do need to at least win 7, maybe 8, or 7 and have a chance at 8 in the bowl game.
All right, you say you got to win at least 7 then. If you lose Saturday, that's 6-2 in your last 8 games.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think you just kind of made your own point there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, yeah. So I guess, do you want to start to get into what we think is going to happen here? Like, how likely do you think it is that they win this game that we've defined as a must win in a more a roundabout way than just saying must win, I guess?
Yeah, I guess my other point, it's not really a question because I think there's not really a way to have this particular discussion without just saying the things we've always said. I think Williams-Brice Stadium's a factor here. A crowd doesn't score points, blah, 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 but it's Mississippi State's first road game of the year. It's Zach Arnett's first ever road game as a head coach in his entire coaching career. It's a night game. I think that matters. I think that plays further into the idea that this is a must-win game. Just wanted to say that.
Yeah. You also have to think that you're going to get a pretty solid shot from Mississippi State here because they also probably view South Carolina as a must-win on their side as well. It doesn't get much easier for them in the SEC West. So
they play Bama next week. Yeah.
They need to win their East games for sure. You got a score prediction for what's going to happen here?
I haven't made a score prediction yet. You can see whatever I end up settling on tomorrow if you're subscribed. I'm seeing a game in the 20s for sure. Like, I think you talk about what this offense has to do. You look at Mississippi State, take out the FCS opponent week 1. Played Arizona week 2, scored 24 points in regulation, get a touchdown to win it in overtime. But that's 14 in the first quarter. They scored 10 points in 3 quarters. And then last week, you play LSU, you score 14 points. So that's taking out the overtime period where you're starting the ball at the 25. That's 24 points in 7 quarters. This offense, for all the talent, it's not playing very well right now. I think if you can get this game into the mid to high 20s, you feel really good about your chances to win. If you can score 30 points, I think I'd be surprised if South Carolina scored 30 points and lost this game, put it that way. I think this game's in the 20s, and I think South Carolina wins it maybe by a field goal, maybe by 4. 28-24, 26-23, something like that. I'm throwing out a couple scores so I can leave my options open before I write it tomorrow, but something in that mid-20s, 3-4 point range.
Yeah, so for reference, the line currently is at South Carolina 6.5. It opened at 5, so people are the money is going towards South Carolina covering, and it's even moved a little bit. I agree with you. But preseason, I put 31-23 in my way too early preview with South Carolina winning. I don't think it's going to get that high scoring now, though, because of the strength of Mississippi State's run game and kind of the way that South Carolina plays that bend and don't break style. I think this game's going to be shortened a lot, and it would surprise me if it gets to that number. But if you had to put me down on something, I do think South Carolina covers. Let's call it like 21-13, something like that.
I did have one more thing I forgot to mention on Mississippi State. I think it kind of is relevant if you're a South Carolina fan because you haven't seen it from your team yet. They are great on special teams. They've got one of the best return men in the country. Tulu Griffin, he's already returned 2 kicks for touchdowns in his career. He's averaging over 30 yards a return. They've already blocked a kick this year. They've returned a kick this year. This is a very dangerous special teams opponent. And Pete Lembo talked about that yesterday. That this is, I think the term he used was, you can't start a new Netflix show this week because Mississippi State will keep you up at night. Something like that. But this is a very dangerous special teams opponent, which we didn't mention yet.
And I also got the sense that Pete Lembo is not particularly satisfied with the way that South Carolina has played on special teams through the first 3 weeks as well. I know Kai Kroger probably isn't off to the start that he wants to be as a punter, although I still thought he had some nice punts in some terrible weather last weekend. But yeah, need to be more on point with that to kind of keep those return men at bay. Your gunners have done a pretty good job of kind of forcing fair catches and forcing very little return opportunities. But if you do give these guys on Mississippi State a return opportunity, then yeah, they can burn you with it. Field goal kicking wise, I guess you've missed your first career field goal this season with Mitch Jeter, but still been pretty solid.
Still okay there, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I still think, South Carolina special teams are better than the majority, but I did get the sense just from Limbo's comments that he's still searching for a little bit more perfection, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the standard here is obviously extremely high, just pretty much what you see on special teams last year, and that's understandable. It's an interesting test this week. You've got a Mississippi State team just looking at their kicking 3 for 4 on field goals this year, long of 49. That's pretty typical. The one miss was in the 40s, perfect on extra points. I mentioned the one block kick. This is going to be an all 3 phases challenge. I'm expecting a 4-quarter game, but I just kind of go back to the must-win conversation, the kind of stuff we talked about with Florida last week, right? You're at home with your backs against the wall, and that kind of helps you play up like they did against Tennessee. I think if this team is what you think it is, if this team is what they think they are in the locker room, you're at home against a team that's talented, but shown a couple of very clear flaws already in 3 weeks, you win this football game.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. If I don't ever bet South Carolina because that just seems like a bad idea. I feel like I get too much information sometimes. But if I was, I think I would pick them and pick them to cover. Speaking of that, do you want to get into some of our staff picks from around the country, or do you have anything else to say?
No, that's what I had on Mississippi State. It's a loaded week of college football. Yeah,
it should be a good one. I told you guys to build up your social credit last weekend and go do your things out in the world or whatever. Honestly, last weekend ended up being a little bit more entertaining than we were expecting even, but this one looks like it's going to be a good one. Let's start right down the road at noon, Florida State.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Coastal tonight.
Oh, well, that too.
No, I'm just going to Clemson. It's fine.
But yeah, Florida State's going to Clemson at noon on Saturday. We have them down, and we lock in these lines earlier in the week, so some of them may have moved a little bit, but we have them down as Florida State -2 at Clemson. How are you feeling about that one?
That's where that line still is, by the way. It's at Florida State -2. First time Clemson's been a home underdog since they faced Lamar Jackson's Louisville in 2016. It looks weird. I'm just taking the weird. It's kind of what we talked about last week with like Mizzou, K-State, and the line made no sense. And of course, Mizzou ends up winning. This just feels like a weird spot where Clemson finds a way to do Clemson things and win. I don't have an explanation for that. I think Florida State's very good. I would probably pick Florida State to win on the neutral field against Clemson, but a weird road noon kick against a Clemson team that's pretty much been a month being told how bad they are by everybody. I don't know, man.
Yeah, I mean, based on what you've seen on the field from both programs this season, it feels like Florida State should win and cover 2 points pretty easily. But I agree. Death Valley is a weird place to go in and try to get a football game. And Florida State did not look great last weekend against Boston College. Now, obviously, some of that could have been them looking ahead to this because they're trying to kind of take over that top spot in the ACC that Clemson's held on to for the better part of the last decade. I'm going to pick Florida State because I think they're the better football team, but I understand the weird that gives you like some hesitance on that one. Let's look at Auburn at Texas A&M. Texas A&M is an 8-point favorite there. That's a beautiful line because that's kind of right where I would put it. And I don't love it. I picked Texas A&M to win, but I did not pick them to cover. Nothing that happened in this one would really surprise me, I think.
Man, I watched Auburn play Cal. I watched them need several shades of luck and turnovers, and I think Cal missed 2 field goals in that game to beat them. I just can't buy 4-0 Auburn. I just don't think they're that good. You're going on the road to A&M. I know A&M hasn't been great either, but playing at home, man, I definitely wouldn't bet this game.
No, it's a scary one.
I think you got to go with A&M at home. Just I don't know. That's a weird one, but
it was one of the few this week that across the board, all 5 of us on our staff picks, which you can check out on GamecockScoop.com, picked one person, and we picked one team. We picked Texas A&M, but there's a little bit of hesitance where 3 of us picked Auburn to cover, 2 of us didn't. So I think it's going to be a weird one. Should still be an entertaining game and tell you a lot about, I guess, where the state of both those programs are right now. All right, prime time. Colorado is at Oregon, and they're 20.5 point underdogs. Any chance that you see Colorado starting 4-0 and keeping this going against Oregon?
Chance, sure. It's football. They've got skill position players. I'm laying the points. I don't think Colorado's seen any kind of line of scrimmage play like what they're going to see at Oregon Saturday. They haven't played an environment like that yet. You can look at Bo Nix's home and road splits, even going back to his days at Auburn. They're pretty drastically better at home. I think Colorado just hits a buzzsaw in this game that doesn't take away from what they've already done or what Dion's building, but I think this is just different than what they've seen.
Yeah, the hype train has reached full steam following that crazy game day last weekend, and Lil Wayne leading them out of the tunnel, and Dion was on 60 Minutes this past week.
I saw that, yeah.
I mean, it's a cool story. I'm fascinated by it from a lot of angles. But yeah, I think this is kind of where some of the fairy tale stops. I still think that they're probably a 7-5, 8-4 team, which is huge coming off of what they started as.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think they're quite ready to compete with the Oregons and next week USC's. But hey, maybe I'll be proven wrong, and we'll see. UCLA is -5 Utah is -5 at home against UCLA. Chip Kelly's kind of probably got his best team so far at UCLA.
Very quietly, but yeah.
But obviously Utah's still good on defense. They're at home. That's a tough place to go play. How you feeling about that one?
That's kind of what I think you hit both points. Salt Lake's a tough place to play. Utah's defense has allowed 31 points total in 3 games this year. I'm taking the better defense at home just on principle. I think Utah – I don't think they're as good as maybe we thought, just looking at the quarterback play there. But I think anybody who has a hard time coming in there and winning.
Yeah. Have we heard anything more about Cam Rising potentially coming back or anything like that?
I haven't seen anything. I'm just looking at Utah's schedule. They're on the road at Oregon State next week, and then Cal, then USC and Oregon. So it's going to get tough for them pretty quick here. But I think at home, I'm
looking at the headlines. He practiced this week. Whittingham said he looked good yesterday, and they'll make the call today on his availability. If he plays, I feel even better about it. But yeah, I think just that stifling defense keeps them in every game like they have so far. All right. Another interesting one, and this is one that we were all over the map on our staff picks. Ole Miss is at Bama. Bama's still a 7-point favorite at home there, but obviously not playing their best football right now. Ole Miss seems dangerous enough to knock them off. How are you feeling about it?
I pick Bama to win and cover. I'd feel better about that at 6.5. Having to lay a full touchdown scares me a little bit. I just can't buy that Alabama's this bad. You know what I mean? I just can't do that. Like Mike Shula didn't walk out of the tunnel. Like, come on, people. They're going back to Jalen. Go ahead.
I was just saying almost like your same take with the Clemson situation. It's at home, and they've been told how crappy they've been for the past 2
It's
weeks.
not quite that, because I still don't think this is a championship Alabama team of any kind. They're going back to Jalen Milroe, who I thought played okay in a Texas game, even if it's just not what you're used to from Alabama quarterback. Definitely better than Buckner and who was their other quarterback that played last week?
Yeah,
I can't even think.
I only know Milroe and Buckner off the top of my head. So
they play. Anyway, at home, I think this is a good Ole Miss team. I don't think it's a great Ole Miss team. Interested in how they fare on the road. I still have questions about that defense. This just feels like a Nick Saban, oh, I got you again, Lane kind of game.
Yeah. Also, there's the added factor, which we talked a little bit on the podcast of Lane Kiffin kind of trolling them a little bit. So we'll see if that plays in. If Bama does kind of get ahead, it wouldn't surprise me if they want to make a statement. I did pick Ole Miss, though. I think that they might go in there and make it happen. I just haven't been impressed with Bama's offense at all so far, and I don't know that they can keep up, but maybe they won't have to if their defense plays up to the level that they can. Another game that I thought was really weird, although we all picked Kansas to win, is BYU is plus 9.5 at Kansas. BYU, who just knocked off Arkansas last week and beat them in fairly convincing fashion. That felt like too many points to me. So I picked Kansas to win at home, but I can't pick them to cover 9.5.
It's a weird line. It's a weird kind of up-down thing. You had Kansas not playing that well last week at Nevada in the win. You had BYU playing probably better than they would normally play last week in Fayetteville. I picked Kansas to win and cover at home. I think going on the road 2 weeks in a row is tough. You're going to see that later this year for South Carolina with A&M Mizzou back-to-back. I don't know. That's a really hard one to get a read on, but I think I'll go with the home team, and that would set up maybe 4-0 Kansas versus 4-0 Texas next week.
You don't think beating our Kansas gives them any advantage against Kansas? Man, that was bad.
Yeah, I mean they're pretty good. That was not nothing going to Fayetteville last week and shutting down that all. I'm not shutting down. They won 38-31, but that's not nothing winning that game. But
no, I still think Arkansas is a decent team. Is Arkansas better than Mississippi State? We'll find out eventually, right? But
yeah, they're going to play in October. But yeah.
All right, you got Oregon State. I'm really excited about this game. Oregon State minus 2.5 at Washington State. Both programs that are playing pretty well right now. Both have pretty good offenses. I think that this one is this a Pac-12 after dark
7 o'clock
slot? Oh, that's too bad. If it was Pac-12 after dark, even better. But it definitely has the vibes of just like a weird, high-scoring.
It's DJU and Cam Ward. It's two quarterbacks that have played very well with two offenses that are. This game ends in the high 30s or 40s, probably, right?
Oh yeah, I think that this is like a 41-39 or something like that, which is exactly why I want to watch it. I'll have to queue that one up for the DVR. Now that I have a DVR, I'll watch it on YouTube the next day or whatever. But
I'm taking the Beavs because I've been on them since the summer, but I wouldn't at all be surprised if Washington State got the ball last and kicked a field goal or whatever.
Yeah, we all picked Oregon State and we all picked them to cover. I mean, it's essentially a pick 'em. It wouldn't surprise me if it went the other direction, though. All right. Just for you guys' reference on the staff picks, we all picked South Carolina to beat Mississippi State. Although three of us picked them to cover, two of us did not. Alan, you picked them to not cover, and that was back at 5 points. So you're seeing this one as pretty close, I guess?
I think we're going to spend all week talking about how South Carolina's special teams haven't been what they were last year, and then Mitch Jeter boots a winning field goal with like a minute to go because it's kind of the way these things work.
Hey, that that would be exciting and fun. Although, maybe not the ideal result of what South Carolina fans are looking for this weekend. All right, another big one: Ohio State -3 at Notre Dame. We're pretty split on this one. How do you see this one playing out?
All right, I can understand why Ohio State's favored. That offense seems to have figured some things out. Marvin Harrison Jr., there's not really a matchup for him anywhere in the country, I don't think. The reason this gives me pause and the reason I pick Notre Dame to win the game outright, beyond just the fact they're playing at home, is I look at Ohio State, I look at what they've struggled with the last couple years, kind of in those Michigan games, and it's the ground and pound, hand the ball off, get physical thing. I mean, Donovan Edwards had over 200 rushing yards against Ohio State last year. I think Notre Dame can just hand the ball off to Estime and kind of force – I don't know. I see a lot of similarities between this Notre Dame team and maybe the last two Michigan teams and how they want to play offense, and Ohio State gave up 40 points to both those teams. I think Notre Dame can kind of just lean on that a little bit and kind of take the Michigan game plan.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we really know what either of these teams are at this point. Maybe Notre Dame has the best win against NC State, although I don't know what NC State is either. I do think thus far Notre Dame's probably looked like the more complete team, but maybe it's just years of Notre Dame kind of not being able to live up to the hype in these primetime big sort of games. I picked Ohio State. I do think, you have the quarterback advantage. You have the running back advantage. Defense is probably pretty similar. So, I mean, I can definitely see the Notre Dame scenario. I guess it's just a gut feeling more than anything.
I mean, no one's going to say you're crazy for picking Ohio State to win a football game. Like, I don't think there's a wrong pick here.
The last one we have on our picks, and then we can get into any other games we're interested in this weekend. Iowa is plus 14.5 at Penn State. That is a tough line for me.
I don't like the hook. Yeah.
I wish it was 13.5 or 14. But I did pick Penn State, and I did pick them to cover, but I kind of hate it. I wish it was like right at 14 because I'd feel better about it.
I'm laying it. It's home. It's a whiteout. It's Cade McNamara on the road against 105,000 people. I still think Iowa's offense is fixed, even though it played better last week. I'm just laying it.
Yeah, feels fairly safe. I mean, Iowa finds a way to make these games ugly, so we'll see. But Penn State's looked pretty good so far. Other games this weekend of note, you did mention Georgia State and Coastal Carolina tonight. Coastal Carolina is a 6.5 point favorite. I think that'll be fun. I do think Coastal Carolina ultimately probably wins that one. They're more battle tested thus far. Georgia State's had a pretty easy schedule up to this point. But
that's just typical weeknight Sunbelt fun with a game that has an over-under in the 60s. Just enjoy it. That's fun.
Definitely. Any chance that Cincinnati can knock off Oklahoma, you think? So Oklahoma is 3-0 right now, number 16 in the country. They're a 14.5 point favorite, but it's at Cincinnati.
Chance, yes. Would I pick it? No. Cincinnati looked bad last week, lost at home to Miami, Ohio. I'm very curious about Oklahoma. Dylan Gabriel, very quietly, I think he's getting lost in kind of the Michael Penix, Caleb Williams thing. 11 touchdowns, 1 pick, and almost 1,000 yards already this year. Is Oklahoma good? Are they better? We probably won't find out till Red River in a couple of weeks. But I think they're good enough to win this game.
Yeah, I think probably safe to say they're taking a step forward forward this year. But I don't know that they're ready to compete with Texas. We'll find that out. Other interesting games. Maryland, Michigan State. Maryland's minus 7.5.
Whatever the number is. Maryland.
Yeah, that Michigan State thing is a dumpster fire right now, so hard to pick them.
Arky LSU at night. Arky needing a bounce back, having to walk into Death Valley. LSU favored by 17.5.
That's a lot of points.
That is a lot of points. We'll see.
Man, that's Texas and Baylor. Texas is at Baylor, but Baylor's 1-2. Hasn't looked particularly good in those starts so far. They played all right against Utah, but lost to Texas State, obviously, to open the season.
The kind of game a Texas team would lose if they're not back, but I think they are, so I think they'll win this game.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. North Carolina is at Pitt. North Carolina only favored by 7.5. That feels a little close for how Pitt started their season. They've lost to Cincinnati and lost to West Virginia in back-to-back weeks so far. Also kind of feels like one of those trap games, though, where they suddenly show up at home against a ranked opponent.
Pretty good defense at home at night. I believe that's UNC's first road game of the season. I get why it's only at 7.5. Drake May, by the way, 4 turnovers this year in 3 games. Still probably pick North Carolina to win, but curious.
Granted, 2 of those were against
South Carolina.
Yeah. That's pretty much all the ones that stood out to me this week. Obviously, there's still fun games throughout. Any other like final notes or whatever on week 4? We're 4 weeks into the season already. It's crazy.
No, I think that's that's pretty much what I had from Mississippi State. Check out GamecockSoup.com. We've got all kinds of stuff on the injury report tonight. Pick tomorrow from me. Obviously, content Saturday. We've got the live chat. If you want to come hang out and ask me questions while I'm in the press box Saturday, what's going on with the game, what I'm seeing. Stick around. Good weekend coming up.
Yeah, and speaking of the live chat, those of you that have been with Rivals for a long time, it's a little bit different. So on the top of your toolbar on the forum, it'll say chat, and it'll have like a little green circle beside it whenever it's open. Hop in there and we'll be talking ball, and it's kind of a little bit more like a old school chat room, so we can kind of see things much quicker, and that's the main benefit I've seen thus far, is I can just talk a lot more. I can get a lot more out there back to back instead of posting them as traditional threads. If you like the traditional threads, you can still see the live thread and it updates there too, but come check it out on Saturday. We usually open it up about 2 hours before the game or so. All right. We'll be back here on Sunday morning to talk the review of South Carolina and Mississippi State. Until then, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll see you.